My name is Della. I am 27 years old. And the last time my mother called me, she was 6 days from eviction. My sister had blocked her on every platform she owned, and the first thing my mother said when I picked up was that I had always been the strong one. I want to tell you what I did when she said that. But first, tell me something. Where are you right now as you listen to this? Are you somewhere that feels like yours? Somewhere comfortable? Somewhere you chose? Because I spent a long time not having a place that felt like mine, and I want you to hold that for a moment before I tell you what happened at my aunt's wedding 8 years ago, because that night is where the story actually begins. I was born in Akron, Ohio, on February 11th, 1997, the second daughter of Patricia Voss and a man named Dennis who had his own second family in Medina by the time I was 7, and who is not a significant figure in this story, except as an absence. An absence my mother filled by making the rest of us into a hierarchy. My sister Brianna is 3 years older than me, and she has my mother's gift for being looked at. She walks into a room and the room reorganizes itself around her, which is a quality my mother treated as a moral achievement rather than a personality trait. I was the one who read in the corner and remembered things and paid attention to details nobody had asked me to pay attention to. That was not a quality my mother found useful until she needed money. My father, Dennis, left when I was 7. He did not so much leave as redistribute. He had been building a second life in Medina for at least 2 years before my mother found out, which she described to me once, years later, in the flat recounting voice she reserved for facts she had made peace with. He had a woman named Carol and 2 young sons and a split-level house with a 2-car garage, and he visited us twice after the separation, once at Christmas 2004 and once the following Easter. And then the visit stopped, and the child support came sporadically until it stopped too. My mother dealt with this by working longer hours at the dental supply company where she was a billing coordinator and by reorganizing her emotional world so that Brianna was at the center of it. I understood this even at 7. I am not certain that is a healthy thing to understand at 7, but I understood it the way children understand the rules of the house they live in, not with analysis, but with the body. Brianna was the one who looked like my mother's side of the family, who had the temperament my mother recognized, who made the same jokes and cried at the same movies and wanted to be admired in the specific way my mother had always wanted to be admired. I was my father's daughter in appearance and in disposition, careful, interior, more interested in how things worked than in how they looked, and I think my mother looked at me sometimes and saw the person who had left. I am not offering this as an excuse for what she did. I am offering it as the explanation for a pattern that began early and ran only in one direction and never changed. When Brianna got her driver's license in May of 2012, my mother took her to Applebee's and let her order anything she wanted and came home glowing and told me the story in detail. When I got mine in March of 2014, my mother said, "Good, now you can drive yourself places," and went back to her phone. When Brianna graduated from Cuyahoga Community College in May of 2016 with an associate degree in marketing, my mother threw a party with 30 people and a sheet cake with Brianna's name in blue frosting and a little fondant mortarboard on top. When I graduated from the same institution 8 months later in December 2016 with a degree in occupational therapy assisting, a 2-year program that required 200 supervised clinical hours and a state board exam I passed on the first attempt, my mother attended and sat in the 4th row and left immediately after the ceremony because she had plans with a friend. She did not bring a cake. I did not make a scene at my own graduation. I had learned by then that making a scene was not worth what it cost, and that naming what I saw did not change what was true. In the winter of 2015, when I was 17, my mother lost her job at the dental supply company. The billing coordinator position she had held for 11 years was eliminated when the company was acquired by a larger distributor out of Columbus. The acquisition team brought in their own administrative staff and let most of the Akron office go on 60 days' notice. My mother received a severance of $4,200 and a COBRA continuation for 90 days of health insurance, and she did not, in the months that followed, look for work with any urgency I could observe. She had always believed, I think, that the right arrangement would eventually present itself, and she was waiting for it while the severance ran down. Brianna was at Cuyahoga Community College that year, living at home, contributing nothing financially. I was a junior in high school working 12 hours a week at a CVS on Copley Road for $8.75 an hour, saving most of what I made, because I had understood since middle school that nobody was going to fund my life after 18, and I needed to be ready when the time came. In March of 2016, our water was shut off for non-payment. We went 2 days without running water. I managed it by bringing gallon jugs from the break room at CVS and told no one at school because I was 16 and had already decided that the way through difficult things was not through making them public. My mother was tearful and self-reproaching during those 2 days and quickly recovered once the service was restored. She paid the outstanding balance of $312 with a check I later realized had come from a joint emergency account she and my grandmother maintained. She did not tell me this. I found out 3 years later when my grandmother mentioned it in passing, with the mild embarrassment of someone disclosing a thing that had been kept quiet for reasons she no longer remembered. That water shutoff is the earliest version I can trace of the pattern that would define the financial dynamic between my mother and me for the next decade. There was a crisis. Someone solved it. My mother accepted the solution as her due and moved forward without examining how close to the edge she had come or what it had cost the person who pulled her back. In 2016, that person was my grandmother. By 2019, it was me. I want to be clear that I understood this at the time. The $49,600 in the spreadsheet did not accumulate from naivety. I knew exactly what I was doing. I did it anyway, because at 22 the feeling of being needed and the feeling of being loved had become, in my internal accounting, the same number, and I had not yet learned to tell them apart. The single moment I can point to, the one I carry the way you carry a smooth stone in a coat pocket, not because you need it but because your hand keeps finding it, is my Aunt Renee's wedding on September 14, 2019. My Aunt Renee is my mother's younger sister, a woman I had always liked more than my mother had given me credit for, warmer, less interested in hierarchies, genuinely curious about my work in a way my mother had never managed. She was marrying a man named Keith Gallagher in a ceremony at the Sheraton in downtown Akron. I had driven from Cleveland, where I had been living for 3 months since starting my first job as an occupational therapy assistant at Lakeview Rehabilitation on Mayfield Road. I was 22 years old, making $38,400 a year and feeling, for the first time in my adult life, like I was standing on ground that would hold. Brianna was 25 and had just moved back in with my mother after the end of a relationship that had lasted 14 months. The two of them drove to the wedding together and were already at the head table when I arrived at 6:40 p.m. and found my seat card at a round table near the windows. Not the back exactly, but away from the family cluster near the front, beside a retired civil engineer from Canton named Harold, who had very strong opinions about the I-77 interchange and who turned out to be perfectly good company. There were 7 white candles in the centerpiece. I know because I counted them before the main course arrived, and I counted them again during the toast. The toast happened at 7:15 p.m. My mother stood up with a champagne flute and spoke for just over 4 minutes. I know the duration because I had started watching the clock on my phone under the table, a habit I had developed in family situations as a way of building an objective record of events I knew I would otherwise second-guess. She mentioned my Aunt Renee twice, warmly and by name. She mentioned Keith once. She mentioned my sister Brianna 3 times, her charm, her warmth, the woman she was becoming. She spoke for 30 uninterrupted seconds about how Brianna lit up every room she walked into. She did not mention me. At the very end, she looked out at the tables with a specific smile of someone who believes they have just been generous, and she said, "Some children just shine brighter, and that's simply how it is." The table went quiet. Not dramatically. In the particular way a table goes quiet when something has been said out loud that everyone understood was true and that no one expected to hear stated in public in front of 60 people with champagne flutes in their hands. Harold stopped mid-bite and then resumed. My sister, to her credit, stared at her glass and did not smile. I looked at the 7 candles on the centerpiece and counted them a second time because I needed something to count. I did not leave early. I ate my salmon and my twice-baked potato and drank 1 glass of water. I danced once with Harold, which was better than I had expected. At 9:40 p.m. I said goodbye to my Aunt Renee, who hugged me hard enough that I felt it through my dress, and I found my coat and walked to my car and sat in the parking structure for 11 minutes without starting the engine. Then I drove back to Cleveland with the windows down and the highway flat and dark in every direction, and I did not call anyone, and I did not cry, and I did not do the thing I had done every other time I had been in a situation like this, which was to call my mother the next day and try, carefully and hopefully, to tell her what I had felt. I had tried that before. The clearest attempt had been in October of 2017, after she had missed my graduation ceremony, because Brianna had a bridal shower the same afternoon. A shower for a fiancé who would last 9 months. I had called her the Monday after graduation and told her, in the most measured terms I could construct, that her absence had hurt me and that I felt, consistently, like the secondary daughter in our family. She said, "Della, you know I love you equally." Then, oh, speaking of Brianna, did she tell you he proposed at the restaurant? The ring is absolutely beautiful. And the conversation moved on. I had learned that day that naming what I saw did not change what was true. What had changed was only my own expectation, because naming it and having it dismissed taught me that the hoping was the expensive part. The naming was free. The hoping cost everything. I did not hope after the wedding. I drove back to Cleveland and went to work Monday and made an appointment with a therapist my coworker Jana had recommended, a woman named Dr. Asha Pillai, whose office was on Fairmount Boulevard in Cleveland Heights. I saw Dr. Pillai for the first time on October 7, 2019. I have seen her bi-weekly since, more than 40 sessions over 4 years, and she remains one of the most useful investments I have ever made in myself. The first thing I told Dr. Pillai was about the wedding. The second thing I told her, 2 sessions later, was about the money. The money had started before the wedding, technically. In August of 2019, 6 weeks before the Sheraton, my mother had called in a low-grade panic about an electricity bill, $340, 2 days from shut-off, and she was short. I paid it online from my phone in 4 minutes, and then, because the crisis had taken 3 minutes of my shift, and I did not want to repeat it, I set up an auto-pay from my checking account for her monthly utilities. Gas, electric, and internet combined $847 per month. I filed it in my mind under the category of practical maintenance, the same category as getting the oil changed or keeping the renter's insurance current. It needed to happen. I was the one who could make it happen. I made it happen and moved on. I did not tell anyone. It did not occur to me to tell anyone. Over the following 2 years, the auto-pays accumulated the way things accumulate when no one sits down and has a direct conversation about them. In February of 2021, my mother called to say her car insurance had lapsed for non-payment and she needed the car to get to her job at the packaging facility on Romig Road, where she had been working since 2017. I added car insurance to the auto-pays, $178 per month. In April of 2021, she mentioned in the same oblique, not quite asking tone she had perfected over the years that her credit card minimum had already gone to a collections agency once, and she was trying to keep it current. I added the minimum payment, $215 per month. By December of 2022, I was covering $1,240 per month from my own account. $14,880 annually, drawn from a salary that had grown to $52,000 since my promotion to full occupational therapist in March of 2021, but that still required careful management. I tracked every charge in a spreadsheet I had built myself in January of 2020, a simple 2-column table, account name and monthly charge, with a running total at the bottom that updated automatically whenever I added a new entry. I reviewed it every month when the statements cleared, with the precision of a person who is very good at maintaining systems. At my November 2021 salary review, my supervisor at Lakeview, a registered occupational therapist named Carol Huang, who had supervised my fieldwork hours and written my promotion recommendation, asked if I had any financial goals she should be aware of in structuring my compensation package. I told her I was building an emergency fund and trying to increase my retirement contribution. I did not mention the $1,240 per month I was routing to Akron. I did not think of it as a thing worth mentioning. Dr. Pillai, when I finally told her about the spreadsheet in January of 2022, was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "What do you get out of keeping the utilities on for someone who doesn't acknowledge that you're doing it?" I said I hadn't thought of it that way. She said, I know. I spent the next 14 months thinking about it. I did not stop the auto-pays. But I started watching what I felt each month when I opened the spreadsheet, the mild, complicated satisfaction of a system working, mixed with something underneath it I had not been willing to name. What it was I eventually understood was the hope that one day she would notice. Not thank me, necessarily. Just notice. Just say, I see that you are here. My grandmother died in January of 2022. Her name was Meredith Alston, and she had been a practical, somewhat severe woman who had worked as an administrator for the Akron School District for 31 years. She had always been warmer to me, in her particular unsentimental way, than my mother had managed, genuinely interested in my work, genuinely pleased when I passed my licensure exam, the person who had sent me a card for my first day at Lakeview that said simply, "You earned this." Good. At her memorial service on January 22nd at the First Presbyterian Church on Exchange Street, my mother gave a short eulogy that mentioned Brianna 3 times, her closeness to her grandmother's love for her, the humor they had shared. She mentioned me once, in a list of survivors. I sat in the 3rd row and thought, there it is again. The same hand, the same motion, the same person not quite in frame. I went home from the memorial and opened the spreadsheet. 25 months of entries. Running total, $30,950. I did not cancel any of the auto-pays. But I added a column I had not had before, labeled simply Note. I typed my grandmother's name into the note field for January 2022 and closed the laptop. I told Dr. Pillai about the note column at our next session, January 31st. She asked what I thought I was building. I said I thought I was building a record. She asked, of what? I said I didn't know yet. She said that was honest. I know now. I was building the record a person builds when they are not yet ready to act but have already decided that when they are ready, they will have evidence. The spreadsheet was not a plan. It was a preparation. In the spring of 2023, 3 weeks before the April 3rd call, I had a routine check-in with Dr. Pillai on March 13th at 5:30 p.m., in which she asked me directly whether I had given any more thought to the auto-pays. I said I had thought about them every month for 14 months. She asked what I was waiting for. I said I was not sure I was waiting, that I thought I was watching, and that watching and waiting were different things. She said, how are they different? I said, watching is what you do when you have not yet decided. Waiting is what you do when you have. She asked which one I was doing. I thought about the note column. I thought about my grandmother's name in the January 2022 field. I said, I think I have decided. She said, I think so too. Brianna and my mother continued their satellite orbit, proximate, dependent, occasionally crashing. Brianna moved in and out of the Akron house 4 times between 2019 and 2023. Each departure followed a dramatic argument my mother described in long calls I received with the phone on my shoulder while charting patient notes. When I offered opinions, my mother said I did not understand Brianna's particular struggles. When I did not offer opinions, she said I was cold. In early March of 2023, Brianna moved back in for the 4th time. The reconciliation lasted 11 days. The collapse was about money. Brianna had borrowed $3,000 under a verbal repayment agreement, had not repaid it, and became hostile when my mother raised the subject. My mother called me on March 14th at 6:22 p.m. to say Brianna had screamed at her and packed a bag. On March 17th, she called to say Brianna had blocked her everywhere. On March 21st, she called to say her landlord, a man named Mr. Todick, who managed the property through a company on Market Street, had posted a formal notice about overdue rent. I told her to call the management company and ask about a payment plan. She said she would. She did not call back. On April 3rd, 2023, at 7:58 a.m., my phone rang from a number I did not recognize. I picked up. Patients' families sometimes call from personal phones. It was my mother. Her regular phone had been shut off for non-payment, and she had borrowed her neighbor Connie's phone. She had been trying to reach Brianna for 2 weeks. Mr. Todick had sent a second formal notice. She was 6 days from the eviction date. She was crying before she finished the first sentence. I let her talk for 7 minutes. She described the rent. $1,140 plus a $260 late fee, total $1,400 owed by April 9th. She described Brianna's silence. She described two relatives who had not picked up. And then she arrived at the sentence she had been building toward, in the soft, certain tone of someone who has already decided how the conversation ends. You've always been the strong one, Della. I knew you would pick up. Not. I should have called sooner. Not. I know I have not always been fair to you. Not. There is something I have been meaning to say about September 14th, 2019 and 7 candles and a champagne flute and the word shine. Just you're strong. Strong means available. Available means the problem is already solved. Something inside me loosened that had been tight for years. I did not say any of this. I said, "How much is the rent again?" She repeated the figure. $1,400 total, due in 6 days. I said, "Let me call you back." I hung up. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the spreadsheet. 40 months of entries, $1,240 per month, running total at the bottom, $49,600. Outside my window on Eaton Road in Cleveland Heights, a Tuesday morning in early April was doing what it does. Pale, provisional, not yet committed to spring. Then I opened my bank's app. I canceled the utilities auto-pay at 8:22 a.m. Then the credit card minimum. Then the car insurance. 7 separate recurring charges, 7 confirmation screens, 9 minutes. When the last one cleared, I closed the app and set the phone face down on the kitchen table and put both hands flat on the surface. The refrigerator ran. A car went past on Eaton Road. The room was exactly as quiet as it always was. I called her back at 8:45 a.m. She picked up on the first ring. I said, "I'm not going to cover the rent." A silence. She said, "Della?" I said, "I've been paying your utilities, your credit card minimum, and your car insurance for 40 months. The total is $49,600. I did not ask for repayment. I did not tell you I was doing it. But I am not going to keep paying for a version of our relationship that only moves in one direction." A longer silence. She said, "I didn't know you were doing all of that." I said, "I know." She said, "That's not fair, to do something like that without telling me and then use it as a reason to." I said, "I have to get to work." I did get to work. I drove to Lakeview Rehabilitation and saw 6 patients, 2 post-hip replacement mobility assessments, 1 cognitive retraining session, 3 upper extremity strengthening sessions, and charted all my notes by 4 p.m. I drove home at 6:15, made pasta, and sat at the kitchen table, and did not experience the guilt I had been half expecting. The guilt had been there for years, a low ambient sound, the sound of a person who has decided that maintenance is love. It was simply not there. The table was a table. The room was a room. The silence was just silence. At 7:30 p.m., I called Dr. Pillai's after-hours line. She called back at 8:15, and we talked for 40 minutes. I described the spreadsheet, the cancellations, the phone call, the particular quality of the silence, after I said, "I have to get to work." She asked how I felt. I said I felt like I had updated a ledger that had been carrying an error for a very long time, and the balance now read correctly. She said that was a very Della way to describe it. I said I knew. The following morning, Wednesday, April 4th, an automated email arrived at 6:48 a.m. from the utility company. The auto payment for account ending in 4417 had been deactivated. Next billing cycle due April 19th. I archived it. 2 hours later, a similar notice from the credit card servicer. By noon, I had 4 deactivation notices. I archived each one in a folder labeled with the date. On Thursday, April 6th, at 3:11 p.m., my phone rang from the management company on Market Street. A leasing coordinator named Brian asked if I was listed as the emergency contact for my mother's address. I said I was not aware of being listed. He said my name was on a form submitted in 2021. I said I had not authorized that. He said he understood, and that the account holder had not been in contact and the eviction timeline was proceeding. I said I was not in a position to assist. He thanked me and ended the call. I sat with that for a while. She had listed me as emergency contact in 2021. The same year, I had added the car insurance. The preparation on her side had been more organized than I had understood. The name on a form, the soft, certain tone. The spreadsheet was my preparation. The form was hers. I told Dr. Pillai at our session that evening, April 6th, 5:30 p.m. She asked how I felt learning my name was on the form. I said I felt like I had been enrolled in something I had not agreed to, and that the enrollment made more sense now than it had 3 days ago. She said, "Say more." I said, "She always knew I would pick up. Not just the phone. Everything." Dr. Pillai was quiet for a moment and then said, "And now you're not picking up everything." I said, "No. Now I'm not." On April 12th, 9 days after the original call, a voicemail arrived at 11:42 a.m. from Connie, my mother's neighbor. She said my mother had asked her to pass along a message. The situation was very serious, and Della should please call back. I did not call back. I texted Connie that evening. "Please tell her I've received the messages. I'm not going to be able to help with the housing situation." Connie replied 12 minutes later. "Okay, honey. I'll tell her. Take care of yourself." I looked at that text for a long time. Take care of yourself. It was the first time in the entire sequence that anyone had said anything to me about me, and it had come from a neighbor I had never met. By mid-April, my mother had found other arrangements. The eviction did not proceed. I know this because the calls stopped, 6 more from borrowed numbers in the 2 weeks after April 3rd, and then silence after April 19th. The silence after a crisis has its own texture. This one felt resolved rather than escalated, and I let it be what it was. In May, a text from an unknown number. "Brianna and I are working things out." I did not respond. In June, a card arrived at my Cleveland Heights address. Inside, in my mother's handwriting, 3 sentences. She was sorry for a lot of things. She hoped I was well. She knew she had not always made me feel seen. She did not mention the $49,600. She did not mention the wedding. She did not mention September 14th, 2019, or the 7 candles, or the word shine. The card was a perfect document, sincere in the most general sense while omitting every specific thing that would have made the apology real. I read it twice. I put it in the drawer where I keep things I am not ready to file and not ready to discard. My grandmother's card from my first day at Lakeview, the certificate for my licensure exam, a receipt from a restaurant where I had a very good meal alone on my 25th birthday and did not need to share the evening with anyone. I made tea. I went to bed at 10 p.m. and slept without difficulty, which I noted the next morning as significant. Some things undo themselves the moment you stop maintaining them. I had been maintaining something I had never consciously chosen, the version of myself that was the strong one, that picked up every phone, that set up every autopay, that sat at the back table and counted the candles and drove home alone on the dark highway and called nobody. I had maintained it for so long that I had stopped being able to distinguish it from who I was. Setting it down on a Tuesday morning in April did not feel dramatic. It felt like correcting an entry in a spreadsheet that had been wrong for 40 months and watching the balance adjust to what it had always actually been. Boundaries are not punishments. They are the moment when you tell the truth about what you are willing to carry. I was willing to carry a great deal for a very long time. I am not anymore, and I do not owe anyone an explanation for that, and neither do you. There is literature in the occupational therapy field on what researchers call caregiver burden in informal familial arrangements, the financial, physical, and emotional cost borne by family members who provide support without formal structures, explicit agreements, or acknowledgement. Studies consistently show that the absence of acknowledgement is a stronger predictor of burnout than the volume of care itself. The literature calls this invisible caregiving. I have read several papers on the subject and find them useful not because they told me anything I did not already know, but because they told me that what I knew had been measured and named by people who took it seriously, and measurement makes things real in a way that private experience for a long time cannot. If you were in Della's place, if your mother called you crying 6 days from eviction and said you had always been the strong one, and you had 40 months of spreadsheet entries open in front of you, would you have paid the $1,400 and kept going? Or would you have done what Della did and canceled everything one by one and called her back with the truth?